Welcome to Life Stories Network. Today's story is about a teenager who was abandoned by the very people who were supposed to protect him, only to rise in the most unexpected way. Listen closely, because this isn't just about money, it's about pain, survival, and the kind of justice life sometimes delivers. I was 15 years old when my parents told me to leave the house, not in a fight, not in a heated argument, but in cold, calculated words. They sat me down at the dinner table, looked me straight in the eyes, and said I was a burden, a mouth too big to feed, a problem too heavy to carry. I thought they were joking at first. Parents don't just give up on their kids, right? But the look in their eyes told me everything. They were serious. That night, I packed what little I owned. A few shirts, a pair of jeans, some books, and my old sneakers. I kept waiting for one of them to stop me. Maybe Mom would break down and cry. Maybe Dad would pat my back and say it was just tough love. But they didn't. They stood there at the door, arms crossed, waiting for me to leave. It was raining, and I remember thinking how fitting it was. Even the sky didn't want me. I spent the first night on a park bench shivering. Every sound made me jump. Every shadow felt like danger. Hunger set in quickly, and with it came anger. Anger at them for throwing me out. Anger at myself for believing their love was unconditional. I wasn't sure what hurt more, the betrayal or the loneliness, but life has a way of throwing ropes when you least expect it. Mine came in the form of my grandmother. She lived in another city, and I hadn't seen her in years. But when she found out what my parents did, she sent someone to look for me. That man found me after 3 long days. I was weak, pale, and barely holding on. He told me Grandma wanted me to come live with her. For the first time in days, I felt like maybe I mattered to someone. Grandma's house was nothing like my parents'. Where my parents' home was filled with cold silence and tension, Grandma's place was alive with warmth. The smell of baked bread, the ticking of an old clock, the soft hum of her singing as she moved through the house. It felt like I had stepped into another world. She hugged me tight the moment I walked through her door, and I finally broke down. All the tears I had been holding back spilled out. She didn't ask me to stop. She let me cry until I couldn't anymore. Living with Grandma wasn't just shelter, it was healing. She treated me like I was worth something. She asked about my day. She cooked my favorite meals. She told me stories of her own struggles. She didn't just give me a bed, she gave me back my dignity. And for the first time, I started to believe that maybe my parents were wrong about me. Maybe I wasn't a burden, but as I grew older, I learned more about why my parents had done what they did. It wasn't just cruelty, it was greed. They knew Grandma had money, a lot of it, and they thought if I was out of the picture, they'd be the only ones to benefit when she passed. They never imagined she'd see through their act, but she did. She saw the way they had abandoned me, and it broke her heart. She made a decision quietly, without telling anyone. At 16, I was back in school. Grandma pushed me to focus, to dream bigger than my pain. I worked hard, partly out of gratitude and partly out of defiance. Every test I passed, every book I read, I thought of my parents and their words. "You're a burden." No, I wasn't. I was proof they had failed, not me. Years passed, and Grandma's health started to decline. It was slow at first, but the signs were there. I stayed by her side as much as I could, helping with chores, reading to her, listening to her stories for the 100th time. I didn't see it as a duty, I saw it as love returned. She had saved me, and now it was my turn to be there for her. When she passed away, it felt like my world cracked open. I lost the only person who had believed in me when no one else did. The grief was heavy, but what came next shocked everyone, including me. At the reading of her will, the lawyer cleared his throat and announced that the entire estate, worth over $50 million, was left to me. Not a dime to my parents, not a cent to anyone else, just me. The room went silent. My parents' faces turned pale, then red with rage. They demanded explanations, they shouted. They even accused me of manipulating her. But the truth was, Grandma had seen their true colors long before. She knew who cared for her and who didn't. She knew who had love and who had greed, and she rewarded accordingly. I wasn't just the heir to her fortune. I was the heir to her love, her wisdom, and her strength. That money didn't erase the years of pain, but it gave me freedom. freedom to build a life on my terms, freedom to prove once and for all that I was never the burden they were, and as much as they tried to come back into my life after that, I kept my distance. Money can buy a lot of things, but it can't rewrite the past. It can't erase the night they turned their backs on me. What it did do, though, was give me the power to choose who I let into my life, and I chose carefully. Even now, years later, I look back at that 15-year-old kid standing in the rain, suitcase in hand. I want to tell him that the pain won't last forever, that the betrayal will one day turn into strength, that life has a way of balancing the scales. He wouldn't believe me then, but I know now it's true, because sometimes the people who push you down end up giving you the reason to rise higher than they ever could. And sometimes justice doesn't come from revenge, but from simply living better than they ever thought you could. After the will was read, I walked out of that room feeling like the world had flipped upside down. A week earlier, I had been nothing but a kid who still carried scars from being thrown out at 15. Now I was the heir to an estate so massive, I couldn't even picture it all at once. $50 million. It didn't even feel real, but what did feel real was the look on my parents' faces, that mix of shock, anger, and desperation. It was almost poetic. They tried everything to get close to me after that. Calls, messages, even showing up at my door pretending to care. For years they hadn't wanted me, and now suddenly I was their precious child again. But I wasn't that scared, abandoned teenager anymore. I was stronger. I looked them in the eye and told them the truth. They made their choice when they left me out in the rain. They couldn't come back just because fortune had changed sides. Still, I would be lying if I said their attempts didn't mess with my head. Part of me wanted to believe they were sorry. Part of me wanted the parents I never had. But every time I let my guard down, their true nature showed again. One time, my dad asked me for a loan that was more than most people make in a lifetime. He said it was just to get back on his feet. My mom tried to guilt me, saying family should stick together no matter what. I wanted to laugh. Where was that loyalty when I was 15? I started therapy around this time, because the money solved my survival problems, but not my emotional ones. The nights of abandonment still haunted me. The feeling of being unwanted doesn't just disappear because your bank account grows. Talking about it helped me see something I hadn't admitted. I craved love more than I craved revenge. And the only way to find peace was to stop looking for it from people who had already proven they couldn't give it. So I built my own family, not by blood, but by choice. Friends who stood by me when I had nothing, mentors who guided me, even neighbors who checked on me during hard times. These people filled the hole my parents had left. They showed me that family isn't about who raises you, it's about who values you. With Grandma's inheritance, I could have lived selfishly, bought mansions, cars, anything I wanted. But every time I thought of spending, I remembered those days when I had nothing. I remembered the park bench, the hunger, the fear. That memory kept me grounded. Instead of wasting the money, I started investing it wisely. I built businesses, donated to charities that supported abandoned kids, and created scholarships for teenagers like me. Every act felt like I was rewriting my story, not with words, but with actions. Of course, people started to notice. Reporters called me the millionaire orphan, which wasn't true because Grandma had been there for me, but headlines loved drama. I kept most of my life private because I didn't want to be known for the money. I wanted to be known for resilience, for turning pain into purpose. But every story has moments when old wounds reopen. One day, I got a letter from my parents' lawyer. They were suing me, claiming I had manipulated Grandma into leaving me the estate. Reading those words felt like being 15 again, thrown out like trash, but this time I had power. Evidence was clear, witnesses testified, and the case was thrown out. Still, it reminded me of their endless greed, how they would rather drag me through the mud than admit their own failures. After that, I made a decision. I would never let their voices define me again. I stopped answering calls, stopped reading their letters, stopped feeding the cycle of pain. I put my energy into the people who mattered, the ones who showed me love without expecting anything in return. Over the years, I built a life I was proud of. I owned a home that was full of warmth, laughter, and trust, the very things missing from my childhood house. I traveled, not to escape, but to explore. I helped others who had been abandoned, standing by them the way Grandma stood by me. And every time I handed someone an opportunity, I felt like I was honoring her. The most powerful moment came when I stood at a charity event and told my story publicly for the first time. I looked out at a crowd of kids, teens, and parents, and I shared the truth that being rejected doesn't mean you're worthless, that sometimes the people who are supposed to love you the most fail you, but that doesn't define your worth. The room was silent, and then the applause came, not because of the money, but because of the message. Even now, people ask me if I ever forgave my parents. The honest answer is complicated. Forgiveness, to me, isn't about letting them back in my life. It's about letting go of the grip their choices had on my heart. I don't hate them anymore. I don't wish them harm. I just don't give them space to hurt me again. That's my version of forgiveness. Looking back, I realized something powerful. Being thrown out at 15 was both the worst and best thing that happened to me. Worst, because no child should ever feel unwanted. Best, because it forced me to discover strength I never knew I had. It brought me to Grandma, who gave me love deeper than any fortune. And it taught me that blood doesn't make you family, love does. The money, that was just the headline. The real inheritance was resilience, compassion, and the ability to break cycles. I carry that more proudly than any bank balance. And so, whenever I think of my parents calling me a burden, I almost want to thank them. Because if they hadn't pushed me away, I might never have found the life I live now. Their rejection turned into my redirection. Years passed, and my life took on a rhythm I never thought possible when I was 15. Success wasn't just about numbers in a bank account. It was about stability, peace, and the freedom to choose my own path. Every morning I woke up in a home that felt safe, surrounded by people I trusted. It was simple things: breakfast with friends, a walk through the garden, laughter echoing through the halls. That reminded me of what I had built. But with peace came reflection. There were nights I would sit alone, staring out at the city lights, wondering why my parents had chosen greed over love. Part of me still ached for answers. Did they ever regret it? Did they ever sit in their own silence and feel the weight of what they had done? I'll never fully know, and maybe that's the hardest part, not the abandonment itself, but the lack of closure. Instead of waiting for apologies that would never come, I created my own closure. I wrote letters I never sent, pouring out the pain, the anger, and even the gratitude. Gratitude for the twisted way their rejection led me to Grandma, to strength, to a life I would never trade. Those letters became my therapy. By the end, I realized I didn't need their words. I already had mine. I also learned that money draws out shadows you never expect. Distant relatives, old acquaintances, even strangers tried to weave their way into my life with smiles that felt too practiced. At first, I struggled to say no. I didn't want to seem cold, but I learned that protecting my peace was more important than pleasing anyone. Grandma used to say, "You can't help everyone, but you can choose the right ones." I carried that wisdom everywhere. One of the most defining moments of my adulthood came when I started a foundation in Grandma's name. Its mission was simple: to provide housing, education, and support for teens who had been abandoned or neglected. Every brick laid, every scholarship granted, felt like rewriting my past. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was giving others the lifeline I once desperately needed. Seeing their faces light up gave me a satisfaction no luxury could match. Of course, my parents heard about the foundation. Rumors circled that they were furious, jealous that their choices had left them on the outside. Some people asked if I'd ever consider reconciling, maybe offering them help in their later years. My answer stayed the same. They made their choice. They weren't old and powerless when they abandoned me. They were strong enough, capable enough, but chose cruelty. Actions have consequences. I carried that truth like armor. Yet, even with that boundary, I refused to let bitterness define me. I had seen too many people destroyed by hate, trapped in cycles of revenge. I didn't want that to be my legacy. Instead, I built a life fueled by love, not spite. It wasn't easy, but every time I looked at the faces of kids who finally felt seen, I knew I was on the right path. In time, people stopped seeing me as the heir. They started seeing me as a leader, a mentor, someone who had turned pain into purpose. That was the moment I realized I had outgrown the shadow of my parents. I was no longer the boy thrown out into the rain. I was a man who had built his own storm shelter and opened its doors to others. There's a truth I carry with me: wealth without meaning is empty. $50 million could have destroyed me if I let greed take over. But Grandma had given me something far more valuable: her trust, her belief, her lessons. That was the inheritance that mattered most. The money was a tool, not the prize. Looking back now, I sometimes imagine what Grandma would say if she could see me. I think she'd smile that quiet smile of hers and remind me to keep going, to never forget where I came from, but also to never let it chain me, and I don't. Every decision I make, I try to honor her. People often ask me what I would say to that 15-year-old boy today. I would tell him this: you are not a burden. You are not disposable. You are more than the rejection you faced. One day, the very pain that breaks you will shape you into someone unshakable. Hold on, because your story isn't over, it's only beginning. And maybe that's the lesson for anyone listening now. Your worth isn't defined by those who fail to see it. It's defined by the strength you find when everything falls apart. It's defined by the choices you make when you finally get the chance to stand tall again. My parents may have called me a burden, they may have thrown me out, but life had the final word, and that word was not burden. It was heir, not just to money, but to resilience, compassion, and hope. So I live with peace, not because the scars are gone, they'll always be there, but because I turned them into something stronger, and that is a kind of wealth no one can measure.